Okay, my name is Glenn Coggy. I'm president of UAW Local 2250 out in Wentzville. I'd like to welcome everybody. I'd like to start out by thanking a few people. I'd like to thank Mr. Yinka for taking time out of his schedule to meet with us today. And I'd also like to thank Doug Johnson from the Missouri Democratic Party for helping us get this live stream set up. I'm not very good at all this technology, and it's new to me, but he's been very patient and helpful. Connor Kerrigan has been extraordinary, and I thank him for helping with this as well. So we have a excellent candidate for Missouri Secretary of State, and I'm going to turn it over to him for him to introduce himself and tell us who he is and what he's about.
Well, Glenn, first, thanks for this opportunity. Thanks for setting this up and everyone who was involved in making this possible. It's great to be able to connect with you again. I remember getting a chance to connect with you and many of your members at the rally back in last fall, and how important that was to getting some of the wins that you ultimately did. So thank you for your leadership in this region, and thank you to many of your folks every day who are working to move Missouri forward and provide for their families. Well, my name is Yinka Faleti. I am the Democratic nominee for Missouri Secretary of State. I launched my campaign in October. We are doing very, very well and pushing forward in light of the current conditions. For 2 quarters in a row now, we've outraised the incumbent Jay Ashcroft, fourth quarter of last year, first quarter of this year, and outside.
We're having a few audio problems. We can't hear you now.
Is this any better?
Yes, sir. That's good. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for letting me know. So as I was saying, that we've got a real shot at making the change that so many of you and your members and people all across the state want to see. But many moons before I became the Democratic nominee for Missouri Secretary of State, I immigrated to the U.S. when I was 7 years old, earned my citizenship as a youth, got a chance to earn my appointment to West Point and then graduated West Point in 1998. I was commissioned as an officer in the Army, an armor officer, precisely. I served on tanks and in tank units my entire 6 years plus on active duty, 2 tours to Kuwait. Glenn, I imagine you remember a guy named Saddam Hussein?
Certainly, yes.
We remember him well. We deployed to Kuwait from Fort Hood, Texas in 2001 to keep him at bay. And we had a great mission there. It felt great. Came back to Fort Hood, and then a few weeks later, September 11 happened, and we had no idea that we'd be going right back to Kuwait. And so after September 11, my unit and I went right back to where we just were a few weeks earlier, but it felt great. It felt great, Glenn, to be able to defend the country in that time when everybody was wondering who did this and where did they attack us from. And we were one of the few people who could actually do something about it. It was really great to be serving. And after that mission, came back to Fort Hood in 2002, then ultimately left the Army as a captain, left in 2004, and moved here to Missouri, to St. Louis for law school, Washington University. And my plan was to go back in the Army, Glenn, and continue serving as a JAG after I graduated as an Army lawyer. But a firm here called Bryan Cave, you're probably familiar with Bryan Cave.
They're a big one, yes.
Yeah, they're pretty big, and they had other plans for me, and so I went there. I worked as an attorney in litigation. But after a few years, Glenn, I missed service. I missed serving in that big, huge Army mission that I'd had, and I wanted to get back to that. So I went to be a prosecutor at the Circuit Attorney's Office here in St. Louis, helping victims of crime. And I loved helping people who'd been assaulted, people who'd been burglarized. It was the best job. And after a few years there, I realized I was on the back end because the crime had already occurred. The victim had already been victimized, and I could not undo the thing. And I wanted to get from the back to the front. So I looked to the front. I saw United Way of Greater St. Louis. I went there. In fact, I got a chance to work with, United. I went to United Way and I led the division that raised the money for the organization. In 4 years, led the division to raise $300 million for our greater St. Louis region here. And obviously, I didn't do that by myself. I had a great team, great volunteers. And in fact, some of the money that we raised as United Way went into funds that help union members.
Right.
Roz Sherman-Vollinger and her team were part of the folks I worked with at United Way. So I was really proud to be part of the effort that would help members who were down on their luck and just needed a hand up. And so I enjoyed the work, but even after raising all that money, I realized we had still so many issues in our greater St. Louis region. And I needed to get to the root causes. And that's what took me to be the executive director of a nonprofit called Forward Through Ferguson, the nonprofit founded by the Ferguson Commission after Michael Brown. And Glenn, it was generational work, not feel good work like United Way. It was
Right.
just hard slug out work. And I realized that many of the things we were working on, education, healthcare, and more, when you pull the thread back on them, the thread ended at the state level. Education, funding formula, state level. Healthcare, Medicaid expansion, state level. And I needed to get to the state level. And that's why I'm running. And specifically for Secretary of State, that is the frontier for the fight for freedom and democracy in our state and, quite frankly, in our country. We see what's happening right now with respect to vote by mail and other initiatives, and how one party, the Republican Party, is working so hard to try to make it harder for people to vote. And if we can't get the votes, it doesn't matter what we do. And if we can't get fair ballot initiative language, it doesn't matter what we do. And that's why I'm running. Protect our right to vote, protect that ballot initiative language, ballot initiative process.
Right. We see an all-out assault on progressive issues like Clean Missouri right now.
Yeah.
They're working to overturn it as fast as they can. And one of the things with Clean Missouri is limiting campaign finance and various things like that. And you're already up to speed on all that. But the fact that we were able as a citizens of Missouri to override the legislature on that through the ballot initiative process kind of has woken some of them up. And now they're trying to make it harder. They're passing laws to try to make it harder to be able to do a citizen's veto. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, Glenn, it's just ridiculous. Missouri voters voted overwhelmingly, over 60-something%, to support Clean Missouri. That's a clear message to the people in control of our state that that's what the people want, and they think they know better than the people. It's personally offensive. It flies in the face of the very thing that I fought for as a soldier, that many soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines are fighting for today, is that democracy, and that people can have a voice and their voice will be honored and respected. So I'm against what they're trying to do now. I'm not in favor of it. And I hope they come to their senses and they stop their senseless attacks on the voices of the people of Missouri.
Right. Well, I don't think I thanked you, but thank you for your service. I mean, that's quite a deal to come over here as an immigrant and then go full circle and fight for your country. So thank you so much. One of the things when you came out, we spoke a little bit during the strike, and thank you for coming out to the strike and supporting our striking workers. I'll get off track just a little bit, but United Way was excellent. They did an excellent job working with our people. Strikes are difficult. Nobody wins in a strike, but without the support of organizations like United Way, Caring and Sharing the Food Pantry right here in Wentzville, and a number of other organizations, the afl-cio, Five for the Fight, they came together, and that strike was a huge movement in organized labor, and it sent a clear signal across the nation that, we're not done, we're not beaten, we'll continue to fight for our members and for working families. So we do appreciate you coming out. I think that was the first time I had met you in person, and it was great to see you. You're a bright guy. It's a lot of fun to have somebody like you that's young and energetic, that's interested in running and trying to move this country and the state forward. One of the things that comes up that you mentioned was the vote by mail. Um, I don't understand why anybody would be opposed to increasing the citizens' ability to vote. One of the things in the Constitution is the rights of the voters shall not be abridged. Uh, but we certainly see as many obstacles put in place as we can. Very often we see them in some of the poorer parts of the cities and things like that, where they eliminate polling places. Look, I'm an old white guy. I live in rural Missouri. I don't think it's ever taken me more than 15 minutes to vote, and probably 10 of those minutes were chit-chatting with the election judges. But we see people stand in line around the block to exercise their constitutional rights. As Secretary of State, is this something that you will look to address to make sure that we even the disparity in polling places and make it more accessible for all Missouri voters?
Yeah, Glenn, it's a shame the efforts that we're seeing, the party in control in our state right now are just unprecedented to suppress voting. And as you cite, and not just in Missouri, all over this country, you've seen the Republican Party publicly come out and say they will fight legislation in states that would make it easier for people to vote in this time. It is so undemocratic. And as Secretary of State, what I will do is fight to expand access, fight to expand opportunities for people to vote. Certainly, people can continue to vote physically, when we're beyond the pandemic. If they want to vote physically at a polling place, absolutely. That's some people's traditions. They like that. But many people want to be able to vote by mail, and we ought to facilitate that. And in this time that we're in right now, during the pandemic, we must facilitate vote by mail. People should not have to choose between voting their constitutional sacred right to vote and risking their health or their lives. Wisconsin was a warning. We saw what happened in Milwaukee, where in that city they went from over 180 polling places to just 5 in their presidential the elections they had just a few weeks ago, their presidential preference primaries. I mean, that's just unacceptable. And we don't want that to happen here. And under my watch, that would not happen. One of the things that I learned as an Army officer, particularly having deployed to Kuwait twice, where everything you do has a life or death consequence. We're talking about real stuff. You have to have a plan. You have a contingency plan. You have a contingency plan for the contingency plan. This is a mission critical thing. The right of the American people to be able to vote is sacred. In 1918, the worst pandemic this country and this globe has ever experienced in a modern era, where over 600,000 people died in this country, more than 50 million people around the globe. We had World War I going on. We voted. In 1918, we had a pandemic that is worse than this one so far, and we had World War I going on, and we voted. The vote is sacred. It is strict. We must make it happen, and we need to have a plan. Vote by mail. If I were Secretary of State, we'd have vote by mail right now. No one should have to risk their lives. It's unacceptable, and it's undemocratic. And to see that the party leadership is putting partisan politics over the health of Missourians is a personal affront, and it's dangerous to our democracy. I will not stand for that as Secretary of State.
That's great to hear. I think that the majority of our nation, and certainly the majority of Missouri, would be in favor of being able to vote by mail, especially through this pandemic. If I'm not mistaken, the infection rates in Wisconsin went up quite a bit because people were going out and exposing themselves to the hazards of the virus when they went to vote. So I think that every opportunity that people have to get out and vote to vote our vote by mail should be accepted. Would you be open to taking a few questions from some of the people that are participating?
I absolutely would. And Glenn, let me just add one more point, just
Sure.
to dovetail on what you just said. What's important to remember here is a Brennan Center poll that was taken between March 22nd and 24th found that nearly 4 out of 5 Americans want vote by mail in November, including 57% of Republicans. This is not a right issue. It's not a left issue. It's the right thing to do issue. And so, the party, the Republican Party, that is attempting to quell and suppress votes is out of step with the people in their own party who want to be able to vote by mail, who don't want to have to risk their lives during the pandemic. So thanks for that point, Glenn.
No, that's excellent. I think that you're absolutely on the right track, and I think that our state would be in much better hands with you as our Secretary of State. It would be exciting from my perspective. So I'm going to figure out, let's see. We have from Kyle, thank you for stepping up and running. We need you. How can we best support your campaign? Kyle, I'll answer that. Connor's been kind enough to post some links in the chat box. There's places you can volunteer and sign up to work for Yinka. Dude, I apologize. I can never get it straight.
No, you got it. You got it.
Well, that's awesome. And then you can sign up to follow him on Twitter and also Instagram. Plus, there's a place that you can make a donation. That's an excellent question, Kyle. Thanks for asking. We have any other questions over here? Kim, we absolutely need Yinka. Can you see the chat box where you're at?
I can. I see it.
Okay. Yeah, good. Good deal.
Thank you for that, Kim.
Scroll up and see if there's anything else. Let's see the links. Connor, thank you for posting all those links. Connor's been great to work with. And you may or may not know, this is our first attempt to do these type of meetings. So the format is new to me. I had technical support from the Missouri Democratic Party and Zach Johnson. Connor's been excellent. Michelle Whitley is the CAP chair here at Local 2250. Right now the co-chair. She's been sharing it to as many pages as she can so that we can get your word out. One of the reasons that we've started Labor Front and that I'm trying to do this is, as a union leader, too many times I hear my members say, whether it's on the plant floor or Facebook or wherever, they say things like, there's no difference between the two parties. Both parties are two wings of the same bird, and various things like that. And it gets rather frustrating. So I started Labor Front a few years ago with the idea that we could bring progressive candidates on, just like yourself, that you could talk about what your issues are, that you could present them, and then open up a dialogue with the general public and union members to show them. And this forum is open to Republicans, Democrats, any candidate that wants to come in and have a conversation. And I am not opposed to emailing whatever questions I have to the candidates, because I'm not going to play gotcha. That's not what this is about. What this is about is you guys having an opportunity to talk to our union members. So that's why I set it up the way that I did. And I see we got a couple more questions. Kyle, again, I'm very concerned about protecting the right to vote. However, our legislature is working overtime to challenge that right. How can the Secretary of State work against the Republican supermajority?
Well, that's a great question, and Kyle, you're certainly right that the Republican-controlled legislature is working overtime to suppress votes, and they're afraid that if more Missourians voted, they'd be voted out, because otherwise they'd want more Missourians to be able to vote. Well, part of the job of the Secretary of State, there are many things the Secretary of State can actually do, and one of the things that Secretary of State can do, and is supposed to be doing, is there is federal money that comes to Missouri from the federal government through the Secretary of State's office. Secretary of State is supposed to take those funds and distribute it throughout all the local election authorities throughout the state. This Secretary of State has had federal funds in 2018 that he has not distributed, federal funds that came through in 2020 that he's not distributed, federal funds that came through this year, again, in addition, through the CARES Act that was recently passed. That funding is supposed to go to local election authorities to be able to help them make voting more secure, increase number of polling places, hire more poll workers, et cetera. All the things that we need to be doing to make voting more accessible. So that is something that I would do as Secretary of State. And with respect to the legislature, part of what's missing right now in Jefferson City is we do not have an advocate for democracy. The Secretary of State is not a passive player. Isn't just supposed to be sitting in his or her office waiting for things to happen. The Secretary of State should be the chief proponent of democracy, should be pushing for democracy. So that there's a huge voice that's missing. There's a huge influence that's missing right now in our state. And so you see the Republican legislators just willy-nilly chipping away at democracy left, right, and center. Whereas if we had a Secretary of State that is fighting like our Democratic state reps and our Democratic state senators are fighting, if we had a Secretary of State that is joining in that fight, I believe that would make a tremendous difference in terms of the outcomes and the kinds of legislation that we would see come out of secretaries, out of our state house, despite the supermajority.
Okay, thank you. That's an excellent response. We have a question on Facebook Live from Mark Castile. He's UAW member. He's an electrician, worked at Chrysler before Chrysler shut down. Mark's question is, if people will wait in line to go to Lowe's or Walmart, we should still have access to vote in person. I understand the need to have the options to vote by mail, but kind of eliminates the need to have voter ID, doesn't it?
So I think his question is, if I could rephrase it, is he's saying that if you have vote by mail, you don't need voter ID? Is that kind of what he's suggesting?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So let me address this by saying vote by mail is not new. It's just new to Missouri, but it's not new. There are states who do vote by mail now. In fact, 30 some odd states already do it. Missouri is just one of, I believe, 14 states that doesn't do it. So it's not new. And there are ways to make it secure, just like there are ways to make in-person voting secure. So this is not a new thing. For example, Colorado, exclusively, they do vote by mail. Oregon, vote by mail. Washington, vote by mail. Many states do this already. So it's not like we would be experimenting. There are best practices. There are ways to make sure it's safe, secure, and accessible. And hear me well, I'm not saying that we want to eliminate in-person voting. As I said earlier, there are people who prefer to vote in person when we don't have a pandemic killing people. There are people who would want to go to the polls. Maybe it's part of their family tradition. Maybe they have a relationship with the poll workers and they see them, throughout the year for various elections. And we want those people to be able to continue their vote in person traditions. What we're saying is, during a pandemic, we ought to make sure that everybody who is eligible to vote can vote without risking their health or their very life. That's what we're saying.
Got it. Thank you. I hope that answers your questions, Mark. The meme going around Facebook, and I think we've all seen it dozens of times. Look, I think if you have an opportunity to vote in person, it's great, but I don't think that if you are in fear of going out because of the pandemic, that you should lose your opportunity to vote. You have the constitutional right, and I think that that's something that needs to be exercised at every chance that we get. We have a question from Michelle Whitley. With so many unregistered voters in Missouri, what would your suggestion to encourage more voters to get registered be? Is automatic voter registration a good option?
Well, Michelle, thanks for that question. Yes. Automatic voter registration. Missouri is so far behind in this. There are states who do this already, where you're automatically registered, and so you have to opt out if you want to, as opposed to having to work so hard to opt in to vote. This is an issue of democracy. This is an issue of making sure that our democracy is strong. If we don't have democracy in this country, we don't have to look very far to look at the example of other countries that don't have democracy and what's happening in those countries. We don't want that here. we have to keep our democracy strong. It's what I fought for as a soldier. It's what soldiers, sailors, airmen, and women are fighting for today. So automatic voter registration would really, really help people. We ought to make online, in addition, we ought to make online registration very, very easy. Right now, it's a very cumbersome process. And we know the harder you make something, the more difficult you make it, the less likely people are to do it. We ought to make it easy. We do so much online these days. You can buy a car online, if you wanted to. And so we want to make sure that people can register online in a very, very easy way. And if we make those things easy for people, then I think we'll see participation go up.
Great, excellent. I have a comment from Kevin Driscoll. He's a UAW member and active with our political action group. If vote by mail is good enough for the president, it's good enough for everyone. The reason we don't have automatic registration, excuse me, is because Republicans don't want more minority voters. I think that's a valid point. We have a question on Facebook from Richard Orr. Richard Orr is a candidate for state senate. Would you agree that even with in-person voting, we should also have early voting and weekend voting? And that kind of goes along with the question from Jennifer Rushing, who is a St. Charles County Democratic leader. How do you feel about no excuse early voting?
We absolutely need to have early voting in this country. The idea that something, let me step back and then go forward with the question. Let me pause and kind of broaden the question a bit. We're not talking about something that has ramifications for one day or 1 month or 1 year. The decisions we make when we vote have ramifications for generations. Let's pause on this. We have a president now, this is his 4th year in office. The things he has done in these 4 years have ramifications that our children will feel and experience. So why is it that something that is so important, and not just elections for president, for our statewide electeds, for our state reps, our state senators, our local elections, mayor, aldermen and women, council members, etc. Very, very important, all of them. And something that is that important, why is it that we can decide only on one day? And not even a full day at that. I mean, just a portion of a day. People who work third shift and second shift, who can't make it to the polls, or people who have childcare issues. So we need to expand the days. It shouldn't just be a one-day exercise. Voting ought to be a multiple days exercise where you can get to the polls, whether you want to go in person, during a non-pandemic time, if that's what you want to do, or you want to do it from the comfort of your home and mail in your ballot. Many of us received our census letter in the mail. If we can do that in the mail, we can certainly vote by mail. So I support expanding the number of days we have to vote. I support early voting. Certainly, if somebody has already made up their mind, they've done their research, they've studied the candidates, they studied the issues, and they're ready to vote, they ought to be able to do that, and not just have to wait for that one day. So we ought to democratize democracy, and make voting more accessible, make it easier, open up the number of days you can vote, and vote early. Absolutely.
Right, that would be excellent. Do we have any other questions, or would anyone like to make a comment? Jennifer said, how do you feel? Oh, what a great answer. Thank you. I agree. You're awesome, man. It's going to be cool. Did anybody have any questions or anything they wanted to say? So again, this is our maiden voyage, and it took courage for you to come out here and help us out through it. And I wasn't sure how this was going to go, but I really liked the opportunity to sit down and have an interaction with some of our candidates. I fully expect that this is something that we will continue to do, but like every idea, it starts with the step, and you were part of the first step of this process. You were great coming out for our strike. I don't know what your labor background is, what your union background is, but the one thing I get from talking to you here and during the strike is that you recognize the important role that organized labor plays for all workers in Missouri. And you showed that by coming out in support. So I think that it's great. And I appreciate everything that you did stepping up and coming out. It's funny because I've got text messages going, Facebook going. It's all, I'm not ignoring. But I do thank you. I'm going to get better at putting this all together. You're an extraordinary individual, and to come over here as an immigrant and work your way through to college at West Point, become a lawyer at a large law firm in the St. Louis metropolitan area, and never forget where you came from, that it's all about working families. That says a lot about your character, and I am proud and honored that you took time out of your schedule to come and visit with us. We have a message from Kevin Driscoll. Thank you for your time, sir. Wish you the best. You have all our support, and we'll do everything we can to help you. Let me check and see if there's any other questions. Oh, we do have one from Morton Todd. Morton Todd is the chairman of the St. Charles County Democratic Central Committee. Looks like we got a couple more questions. Morton asked, do you have any suggestions on getting young people to vote?
Yeah, I do. So I presume you're talking about our college age young people in colleges all over the state. We are blessed to have colleges in Truman State and Washington University, SLU, St. Louis University, UMKC, Rockhurst, UM-Rolla, we're Mizzou. We have so many talented young people who have so much to offer this state and whose futures are tied to the things that are being voted on now. And so the decisions that our political leaders are making now are things that will affect them in terms of being able to raise a family, how much college debt they have or don't have, opportunities for them to be able to work, opportunities for them to buy their first house, opportunities for them to buy their first car. And so the decisions that we're making now impact them so much. So they have a vested interest. But part of the reason we haven't seen our young people engage in the ways we think they should engage is we've made voting so difficult for them. If you're a young person who grew up in Kansas City and you want to go to college at St. Louis University, well, and you want to vote, well, guess what? You've got to, change your registration from Kansas City and then do all the paperwork to change it to St. Louis. And with our college students who may not understand all the nuances, it's just too difficult. I think we ought to make it where you can vote no matter where you are in the state and no matter where you're from in the state. So even if you're from KC, you ought to be able to vote without having to jump through a bunch of hoops and a bunch of rigmarole to be able to vote in St. Louis. And that's called voting outside of your district or outside your precinct. And it happens in places like Colorado. And so I think, again, if we make voting, if we democratize democracy and make voting easier, I think you would see more young people engage in the process because the decisions that we're making affect them into their future.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's an excellent answer. We'll get caught up on some of the messages. We have a message from Kim. I believe that's Kim Cook Bell. I'll be donating. She's a UAW member. She's president of the St. Louis CLU chapter. Oh, Kim Davis. We got a couple of Kims. Kim Davis is an activist in our union, a political activist. She's been to Washington, D.C., Jeff City, very, very supportive of the union and of good progressive candidates. And she says, I will be donating and hope to help you get in office. Well, Kim, I can tell you that we will be making letters of recommendation to get Mr. Faleti endorsed. I apologize, man. And eventually I'll learn it about the time your last year as Secretary of State. About when you announce to run for governor, I'll have it. So.
Well, Glenn, it took me till second grade. So
okay, well, I don't feel so bad. We have a message from Michelle. Thank you for your support of the UAW. We look forward to working with you. We do have a question on Facebook Live from Donald Looney. Don Looney is a Wentzville resident and a member of Local 2250. You may have met him at the rally out here, the Hold the Line rally. His comment or question is, you mentioned that Missouri is behind several other states in certain areas in regards to voting and registration. Do you have a plan to address this, and what other areas you plan to attack to bring us up to current?
Well, Donald, thanks for that question. Missouri has a terrific opportunity. You start with the people. Change doesn't begin with the political leaders. It begins with the people. The political leaders are there to execute the will of the people and to represent the voice of the people. But it begins with the people. So what have the people said to our political leadership? The people have overwhelmingly said, through Clean Missouri, we want the politics in this state cleaned up. We're tired of the gerrymandering. We're tired of our voices not being heard. We're tired of the extreme voices being the ones that are heard, because most people are not on the extremes. So let's start with the people. The people have said, we want voting to be easier. So some of the things we can do: automatic voter registration, no excuse vote by mail for people who want to vote by mail, which right now I think many people during this pandemic want to be able to vote by mail, but no excuse vote by mail, which includes making that process easy. So not having to go to a notary. Imagine if you have to vote by mail and you have to find a notary. Now, I don't know about you, but I recently had to find a notary, and it's not easy. It actually takes some time to find a notary, and to coordinate with that person and meet with them. It's a whole rigmarole, and it discourages people from voting. We can make that easier. We can reduce that. We can still make it secure and safe, because without having to have this notary requirement. There's something called signature matching, which simply means that when you register, you have your signature on file. Well, we can match your signature that you registered with the signature on your ballot, and we know it's you. And so there are ways to make even vote by mail easier. We want to make sure that people don't have to pay for a stamp. It sounds like something very simple, but there are many people who can't afford it. And they shouldn't have to. They're already paying taxes. So we ought to leverage the tax money they're already paying to make sure that when they vote by mail, that piece of mail goes in without them having to find a stamp or having to go to a post office for a stamp or order a stamp. So you ought to be able to cast your ballot outside your precinct, as I talked about before. In other words, no matter where you are in the state of Missouri, if it's that window of time to vote, as I would prefer it, not just one day, but a window of time to vote, you can vote. You don't have to worry about the rigmarole, the paperwork of trying to vote. So much earlier voting, as I said earlier. If you've made up your mind, you've done your research on the issues and the candidates, you're ready, you ought to be able to vote. Why wait till that one day? So there are all these different things that other states are doing. Again, we're not talking about recreating the wheel. Why do that? Let's look to the best practices of our neighbors who've perfected this process, who understand the ins and outs, who know how to make it work, and who've gone through the bumps and who've smoothed them out over years. And let's learn from them. Colorado is probably our closest neighbor, but even Kansas has vote by mail. So Missouri is increasingly becoming one of very, very few states that doesn't allow vote by mail. I believe only 14 at this time. So these are things that we can do. They're practical, they're within reach. And then, by the way, vote by mail would actually save us money. It would be less expensive to run a vote by mail operation over time once you've kind of perfected the process than to have physical polling places all throughout the state. So these are some of the very, very easy things we can do that would have a huge impact.
Okay, I got a couple of Facebook comments, and then I have a question for you. Facebook comments, Don Looney Jr., I would rather get a root canal than find a notary. It's a painful process. Senate candidate Richard Orr, great session. Thanks for being here today. My question, it kind of goes along with the vote by mail. You've said that there's a handful of other states that are currently doing it. Do we have any numbers of voter fraud, anything to do with any kind of voter fraud that's been going on in those states that would cause concern for the state of Missouri?
Well, Glenn, I'm so glad you raised that. We hear Republicans talking about that. You saw the sham. You saw when the president first got in office, that sham voter fraud commission he put together that ultimately disbanded because it was a sham. The whole notion of voter fraud as a thing in this country is a sham. It's a distraction. It's meant to cause people to be fearful of something, that a vote by mail and other ways to vote that would actually make their lives easier and increase democracy and increase opportunities for people to engage. So when people talk about voter fraud, they're talking about something that is so minuscule in the millions of people who vote in this country, in all the various elections we have. Voter fraud is almost non-existent. I mean, the data is out there. It's nothing to debate. The data is out there. It's very, very minuscule.
I think the Bush administration had their Justice Department do a 10-year review of votes and voter fraud, and it came up to less than 1/10 of 1% over 10 years with 70 million votes or whatever it was. It's a minuscule amount, and a lot of times it was made up by people that voted and passed away after they had voted, or something along those lines. That, I mean, it was just nonsense, pure nonsense. We have a message from Elad Gross. If you need help requesting an absentee ballot, Elad is a candidate for Missouri Attorney General. If you need help requesting an absentee ballot, check out votemissouri.org. Over 40 counties are on board to receive requests by email. So that's excellent information. And he follows it up with great job to me, which I'm barely getting through, and you. So Elad, you're on deck for an upcoming interview. So I'll let you know when we can get something worked out on the schedule. You have made some great points today. And the last thing that I'm going to have is the official state slogan. I'm not going to read the Latin part of it, but it's let the welfare of the people be the supreme law. And there's nothing in the state of Missouri more important than exercising your right to vote in a fair and democratic way. So I thank you for your time. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
Well, Glenn, thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for what you do, for your leadership in this region. UAW is so important to this region and to the state and to this country. I know there are nearly 300,000 union members in Missouri of all stripes, and what the working men and women are doing for our country in this time of pandemic is noteworthy. These men and women are heroes. Many of them are on the front lines right now, working to make sure that our country runs. And I think we missed that during quote unquote normal times. We missed the importance of the working men and women. Our country runs on the backs of working men and women. And I thank you for being a leader in this fight. I heard this. No CEO of a corporation woke up and just one day said, "Hey, I think we'll make the lives of our working men and women better. I think we'll give them paid sick leave. I think we'll give them these things that are human rights." And it is the unions. It is the unions in this country that have fought for people. This country would not be where it is but for the union. So I just want to thank you for that. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm so excited about the fight ahead. Again, our campaign is off to a great start, and we're running hard. We're charging hard because what is on the line is our democracy. It is our sacred right to vote. It is our right to petition our government through that ballot initiative process. And I just want to, again, thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much. And I promise I'll have your name figured out before you run for governor. Thank you for your time. Everybody that tuned in to watch and offered questions and comments, thank you so much. You guys are out there working in the trenches every day to get our candidates elected. We have an excellent candidate for Missouri Secretary of State, and we will continue to do what we can to help him as well as some of the others. So thank you for your time. It's been great. This closes out our maiden voyage. Thank you.
All right. Thanks,
Have a
Glenn.
good night. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.